What's up, my Nimugs? It's your boys, the Elestrals, and we're here to talk to you about a deck that I know I just went 5-0 with. I know, Caleb, you also topped the past tournament with. It's Crabs.
I went 4-1, only losing to you. Let's be clear. I went 4-1, lost to you in Swiss. All right. I
True.
basically 5-0'd.
So true, so true.
And I'm here to talk. I'm a yapper. I didn't play in that tournament. I'm here to yap.
So Kevin has a lot of opinions on this
I'm
list.
opinionated.
The current
I'm a top tier complainer. You know, I'm here to complain.
And we love it for that.
Don't put that in the video.
One of the things we want to talk about was not just a deck profile from the undefeated list in Swiss, but to talk currently about the metagame of Elestrals since the ban of Sparkit, how things have developed. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And we're here to talk about it. So obviously, the main thing that's been the talk of the town has been Crabs.
Yeah.
Mainly the fact that these two cards have the number 6 on it. And how it's able to deal with Rabbit and a lot of other big defenders, and how problematic they are to deal with if you're not playing 5s themselves. I know in this past tournament, I think 70-something% of Top Cut was based around the Crabs themselves.
Yeah, I want to say it was something like 6 out of 8 decks, right?
Quick.
Like 6 out of 8, I think.
It was 5 or 6 out of 8. Yeah, where this.
We're talking like Thunder Nexus numbers in terms of tournament success. Because 6 is such a problematic number to deal with in a way that is advantageous to your spirits and maintaining game state.
This deck's crazy. The first 2 rounds I played against Earth Beatdown, and it was not even close. Like there's a moment where my opponent's like, "How many you want?" I'm like, I don't know, like 15. He's like, "Okay, Vertilith, I'm at like 4 right now." It's like, yeah, because the strength of the deck is how little commitment you have to put into any board that you generate. Because you just put down a 5 of some capacity or a 6, and you say, all right, opponent, if you are not playing the mirror, you now have to struggle so hard to get over this. Because Thunder Nexus, how does it get over? Zeus. Earth, how does it get over? Demeter. Like, those are the only ways that you can get over is with some other help, essentially. Because these decks just don't run natty 5s.
Yeah, I think the big thing to talk about how the meta has developed overall is that with the ban of Sparkit, it allows decks to play a lot slower now, because with Sparkit being in the meta, right, you were forced to basically respond to it immediately when it hit the board, because if you didn't, then on subsequent turns you kept losing card advantage and card advantage and card advantage. So with Sparkit being removed, but Astrabbit remaining in the game, it means that we still have the large defense of Astrabbit, which is a pivotal part of the 5s deck. In general, like, without Astrabbit, this deck would be a lot weaker than it is, but the fact that Astrabbit got to stick around in the format, but Sparkit was the one to leave, has resulted in the game being able to be played a lot slower for a lot of decks, and because you're allowed to play a lot slower, you can just stick a guy with a large stat line on the board and just watch your opponent struggle to remove it. And if they do, by some miracle, find the out to the large number you put on the board, then you just flip a counter rune and you say, okay, you have to do that again next turn.
I think another development, too, is like, because this list doesn't need to play a Divine, it punishes lists that do have to play a Divine. Because of the existence of Lavalith, and even Laurels to an extent too, you are always going to have less spirits on your board than your opponent if they try to commit into something large, which means you then get to punish them with Earthquakes, Lavaliths, Laurels, any type of removal, and this deck gets to maximize on those options while making your back row feel worthless.
Well, that's a big thing about this deck, right, is that it plays so low to the ground. All it realistically needs to do to win the game is run out a big guy every turn. You go 1 turn, big guy, 1 turn, big guy, 1 turn, big guy, 1 turn, big guy. And that's all you have to do, because at the end of the day, your big guys are constantly going to be trading with your opponent's back row, right? They're going to shield it, and you're like, okay, cool, you have to deal with this big guy next turn anyway. And because it plays so low to the ground, it doesn't put a bunch of spirits on the board, so even it itself doesn't play into Lavalith or into Laurels for the most part. It'll only play into those cards once you're heavily ahead on advantage on your opponent, and the biggest advantage there as well is the fact that because you're only realistically spending 1 to maybe 3 spirits in a turn, if you're like playing like a Nog or something like that, or like a counter rune on their turn, because you're only playing 1 guy with 1 spirit, whatever, you're not putting any divines with like 3 to 4 spirits underneath them, you're not playing a stadium, you're not playing any of those cards that like you have to, put multiple spirits on the board for, you're always going to be up on spirit advantage on your opponent. The amount of times where you'll be playing a deck like this, playing against like a Morfrost deck or a Thunder deck or something like that, and your opponent goes, hey, how many spirits you on, buddy? And you go, 16. What about you? And they go, I got 4. All the time. All the time.
Yeah,
It's
legitimately.
This deck is free. It costs nothing to play your cards.
Yeah,
It's unreal.
It's crazy too, because like it makes it so that your Ambrosias feel even more punishing.
Yeah.
It's like I got to play so many more cards, and it even makes it so that even cards like Dratagua, which I know not everybody's on these in their 5s list. I know a lot of people are playing Boombat instead in this slot, which we'll talk about later. Boombat's a really interesting topic. But keeping yourself really high on spirits while your opponent is constantly draining themselves is crazy, and it also lets you play more consistency cards like Nectar of the Gods to dig to those board breakers and punishing cards and more back row.
One thing that I feel about with the Dratagua specifically is the fact that Dratagua feels better in the mirror than Boombat does, and the reason why is because since both of you, like I've made this argument multiple times at this point that like whoever in a game of Elestrals sees more Ambrosia will more than likely win the game. And Dratagua just allows you to play a 4th and 5th copy of Ambrosia. So, like, in a match where you're not playing against, like, the 5s mirror and your opponent is, like, spending a lot of spirits, the Dratagua won't really, like, shift the tides of the game that much. But in a situation where you're playing the 5s mirror, where both players are going to be high on spirits, in a late-game scenario, Dratagua can be the difference between winning or losing because you just need to see that heal card.
It's also crazy, too, that, like, you can just run Dratagua into an open board and get damage in with it. Like, I can't tell you how many times over the course of the tournament that I got damage off of the Dratagua as well.
It almost mandates a poison-tipped arrow as well, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Which
feels so bad.
It feels so bad.
It feels so bad.
It feels good if you're the one running out the Dratagua, bro. Getting PTA'd on a Dratagua, you're like, okay, bless. Like, I'm +4 on spirits on this guy now.
I guess, like, talking about removal in this deck, too, like, obviously 5 doesn't mean that you out everything in the game. Like, if your opponent sticks a Krakatuga, there isn't an Elestral out to
there
make
is
bodies like that. Boombat.
Not a swing.
We'll talk about Boombat. Boombat. But the fact that this deck has the deck space also to max out on the removal, I think we've seen very few lists in the past that have played 3 resting alongside 3 Earthquake, or it's like been 3-2 or 2-3, some combination. But because your spirits are so low, you're always having these cards be live.
And I'll say it, I think if you were allowed to play more than 40 cards, I think there are some decks that would, especially in like the upcoming Daybreak meta, if you were allowed to play over 40, I think there would be some decks that would be significantly better than they are when you can only play 40 cards.
Yeah,
and the reason why is specifically because this deck is able to play as many toolboxy removal options as it can, because it doesn't have to play Stadium's Divine Runes, the Searchers for the Stadium, the Searchers for the Divine Rune, and all that stuff. You don't have to play any of that. You just play 15 to 18 guys, and then the rest is just whatever toolbox you want. You don't have to play these like engine pieces, because the deck realistically doesn't have an engine. It's just big dudes, you know?
Yeah, it's every engine. I guess like the last thing to talk about is like the counter runes and how counter runes just feel terrible into 5s.
Yeah, they do.
They feel really bad. I know in this list, I was playing these 9. I think every 5s list should be playing these 9. I think, Caleb, we opted to play 2 shield, mainly to protect Moss Station, or anything that happens whenever you get tsunami'd. Shield still comes up and it keeps your board presence. But half the time I would see shield too, and just like, yeah, it's fine. You can out my 5. I'm just gonna cast another one. I'll wait to use the shield.
What am I gonna try and like establish more of a board? I'm threatening your board every turn with another 5. I'm actually playing into Laurels potentially if I shield here, and so it feels worse because I'm playing into a Lavalith, which this deck, obviously plays and doesn't struggle to out, but it is a little bit more of a challenge to out a Lavalith as opposed to an average 5 defender or 4 attacker.
Yeah.
I think the big thing with the shield as well, we're expecting the format to be primarily this deck, like for the remainder of the Frostfall meta and stuff like that, and potentially going into Daybreak as well. If you're expecting everyone or most of your opponents in a tournament to be just on 5s, you kind of don't want shield, because shielding a 5 never feels good, because then that means they run out of 5 again next turn, guaranteed. You know what I mean? And more often than not, if I summon a 5 and I swing and you shield it, I am feeling amazing. I'm like, yeah, bet, no problem. I'll play it again next turn, no problem.
Yep, every time.
So yeah, I think it makes sense to drop the shield to 2. I think the only counter rune that's like kind of feels weird is the Tsunami.
It'll probably get a lot better in Daybreak because the variation of this deck strays away from water as much in Daybreak. And so it will end up being a lot more powerful and will be, especially in the mirror, the main way that you out your opponent's guys. It's like exactly Eddie, I think, in the upcoming list that, you know, I've been
Edward!
Edward! Josh, put up Edward. Can you put up the image of Edward?
I think one of two things that we do need to talk about is like how the mirror plays out, because we're expecting the majority of the upcoming Frostfall tournament to be mirrors of this deck. And from my experience, from what I've seen, this mirror is a speed run to who draws removal first, which is why the argument of Boom Bat came up. And I don't know if you want to explain the ups and downsides of Boom Bat, Josh, just to get like the understanding of why you main it, why you side it. What do you do with this card? You know?
Yeah. So there are a lot of 5s lists that are currently maining Boom Bat. I like the Spirit Recovery a lot more than maining the Boom Bat personally. Boom Bat into 5s is interesting for the reason that, again, you're giving up your normal cast to blow up one of their guys. The issue that I have with this card is that it doesn't progress your board state enough unless you have something already established. So, for instance, if my opponent Lava Lifts me and I have 2 Elestrals on board, I feel good about casting Boom Bat because they still have another 5. If I'm casting Boom Bat into an open board, I still feel like I'm losing the game. Whereas a card like Earthquake or Laurels, I can still out their board and progress my own game state alongside it. However, I think as we move into Daybreak, Boom Bat will see a lot more play in cases where you don't have an out to a Spectress, or you don't have an out to a Soulstalks, or a Chronodile, or like a Bag of Winds, or a Wasp Ivy.
Yeah. That's the main one,
like Wasp Ivy. Yeah, Wasp Ivy I think is going to be a huge issue for this deck in particular, moving into Daybreak. So having more removal options that are Elestral based rather than Rune based is something that you do need to have. I think currently for Frostfall, it's a good side option in case you just run up against someone that's running something very off meta that you're not prepared for in best of 3. But there is an argument to still playing this as your 7th, 8th, and 9th copies of Earthquake in the main if you don't want to play the Jertagwas and Spirit recovery options.
I think one thing that's important to talk about with Boom Bat specifically, right, is like, as I was saying before, with Sparkit being banned, a lot of people are choosing to play the game at a much slower pace, which is, it's fine. You know, you can take the game a lot slower now because you don't have the fear of this reoccurring hand rip. However, playing the game slower when your opponent is able to run Earthquake, Laurels, Boom Bat just gives them that much more time to draw into it, meaning that if you are playing the Boom Bat, you do have that response to your opponent sitting on a big Mustation in defense that you can't deal with. Or, again, like you were saying, varied different like forms of Celestial removal is very strong, specifically because of stuff like Bag of Winds, right? Because you'll see a lot of people do stuff like, I'm going to stick a big guy, I'm going to Bag of Winds it. So you can't Earthquake it, you can't Laurels it. Tsunami doesn't matter because it's already in defense, and like unless they swing and you shield, that's the only out. But then with Boom Bat, you have a different out. So it's like fine. With Specteris coming out, Specteris by itself kind of warps the way the 5s deck is played. And the reason why is specifically because Specteris by itself is kind of a response to a lot of the things in 5s that 5 struggles with in the mirror, such as Galaxy being a big example, Mostation being another one, and Viserys. Specteris walks over all 3 of those. Your opponent could have 3 Vis on the board. You run out a Specteris, all 3 of their Vis are invalidated because you can attack over 1 and they can't attack over your Specteris. They have a Galaxy, you can just walk over it. And the thing is, what's the out? Shield? Sure, I'll run it out again next turn. Absolutely no problem. Dense Fog doesn't even work on Specteris. And that's another thing. In the Daybreak meta, Dense Fog also deals with all of these cards. It deals with the Mostation, it deals with the Viserys, it deals with the Galaxy. All of these cards that are pseudo fives that aren't like a printed 5 stat line get a lot weaker come the Daybreak meta, meaning I definitely believe that we're going to be pivoting away from Moss Station Viz Galaxy and kind of going back to the way that we used to play it, which was to play, Sorlet, Necruff, guys with a printed 5 stat line that don't lose to Specteris, don't lose to Dense Fog. They just are 5s with a little bit less versatility.
Or cards like Eddie.
Or
Yeah,
Eddie!
Yeah,
Edward!
Edward legitimately is like a really strong contender for this list. Prior, Galaxy was a consideration because it functionally serves the same purpose as Edward, except with the caveat that Edward just is a better stat line. 4-1 is objectively better than a 3-4.
Galaxy also loses to Dense Fog.
It also loses to Tsunami.
Yep.
Like Eddie is on
Edward's
cast,
great.
right?
It's an on cast, yep.
So Eddie being on cast, A, doesn't lose to Dense Fog, B, doesn't lose to Tsunami because it's water enchanted, and has a better stat line. It's a better card all around.
And also, you can do the power play. You can do the power play of you summon Edward in defense, and then use this effect to change it to attack, and then swing for damage. It's the power play. It's the power
Assert
play.
dominance. Does Eddie target?
It does not.
So the thing that's also really cool about Eddie is that Eddie also is like I'll say it, your fourth, fifth, and sixth copy of Boombat. Because if they go like Wasp Ivy, Bag of Winds, you go, bet, I'm gonna Eddie, turn that mother sucker to defense, and swing over. Wasp Ivy has 1 defense, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so Wasp Ivy with Bag, Eddie,
Yeah, it's 8-1.
turn it to defense,
Damn.
4/3, easy clap.
Yep.
That shit little.
So let me ask you guys this. Do you guys think that this deck going into the Daybreak meta is still going to continue to be the best deck?
Yes.
Yes.
The only contender I think is Wasp Ivy because of just how difficult it can be to out. But there are outs is the thing. The great thing about the current date of this being recording is Daybreak pre-order shipped today or tomorrow exactly. And so just the lucky people that have been able to order product at stores have been able to play. So I've played in stores with this deck, with 5s. It was not even close against every player that I played against, whether they're competent players as well. It was just like, sorry, I just have everything, and you just can't deal with it. The only thing that scared me going in was Wasp Ivy because I knew that one of my buddies was going to be playing Wasp Ivy, and then it didn't matter because I had the outs. And side decking allows you to just, for the most part, be like, yeah, unless I just draw really poor and don't have those outs, even though I'm playing like 12. The deck just feels so good. Like, this is what I will be running until we magically find a new, better deck to play because nothing feels even close at the moment.
I think my 2 questions for the Daybreak format here are going to be, the first one is, where does Solar place against this? Because Solar in initial testing felt very powerful, but from what Josh was telling me, it sounds as though Solar struggles against this deck specifically.
I think the other thing that I'm really intrigued to see as we go into Daybreak with cards like Cryoblast being released is, do we finally have side deck cards that are playable against 5s? Because as of right now in Frostfall, there really isn't anything that you can play to counteract the strategy. Is there anything that will be discovered or teched against these strategies that you're not already playing that you can fit the Spirit Math for to counteract the deck?
That is very much the hard part. Spirit Math in set 5.
That was the other question I was going to have is like, what are the counters? What are the counters to this deck? Is there a deck that hard counters this to the point where if you think you're just playing against 5s, play this deck and you'll win 80% of your games, something like that? Or is there none?
It's 5s.
It's 5s.
It
It
is
literally
the
is.
fives
mirror.
Just play the mirror.
Yeah. Genuinely, I think the only card that has been released in Daybreak to counteract this is Cryoblast.
Specteris.
And Specteris, but
Yeah,
Specteris is also a 5.
Specteris,
Like,
Dense Fog, both of those. Like, Dense
Yeah.
Fog clears, at least the set 2 version, like, easily, which is why Galaxy is absolutely getting put out behind back. Moss Station I'm considering as well, because Dense Fog just kind of hard clears some of the pseudo 6 and 5s of the deck. Like, legitimately, Lumaru might be a better pick than Galaxy because it'll come up more, and it matters that it can't be Dense Fogged. We now have 6 copies of a 5/2 that we can play, and that feels really good. It's absurd. This deck, it's unfortunate because it feels really nice to play a lot of the time, but the mirrors are just really grindy and kind of just become exhausting almost because one misstep and you could just lose an entire game. And so across a best of 3, it's just a very exhausting matchup to play. And I would much rather be playing some more fun and skill-intensive stuff like Solar.
Yeah, I'll say it.
Yeah.
I'll be the guy who complains, bro. This deck isn't fun. It's not fun to play. It is not fun to play against. It is one of those decks that we've had. Thunder was like this for me as well. It's one of those decks that I don't want to be playing this, but I have to play it because I want to win. And this is the only real deck that gives you a legitimate shot at winning. And I think that's unfortunate because there's a lot of really fun and cool decks in this game. The Water Nexus deck is fucking sick. The Locagon stuff and everything. Cool ass deck. Love that deck. The Wasp Ivy deck is also very cool. I think that deck is going to be very cool come set 3. The Solar deck is the one I was very excited to play in set 3. But if the Solar deck can't beat this ever, like, I'm not going to be playing it. If this is the deck that wins, I'm going to be playing this. But what's unfortunate is that this deck's gameplay is like very boring in the sense that all you're doing is big guy punch. I don't want to play Ooga Booga. You know, I want a deck that interacts with itself in a unique way. This deck doesn't have any unique interactions. It's just Ooga Booga, big guy punch. You know what I mean? So,
the issue about a lot of these other cool the decks that seem cool, essentially, I think the one biggest problem they all have, other than they can't reach the 5 stat line, because a lot of them, like 5 steals pieces from, like Mustation comes from Earth, and then you have, you know, Eddie, which comes from the new cool water stuff. You know, they all have some of the pieces that can make them contend the 5 deck. The main issue that they all struggle from consistently, this is an issue that Josh has been talking about for quite some time, and that is the fact that you play a Divine and you lose the game because you have to invest so much spirits into it that if it gets outed, you are way behind. Even if it doesn't get outed, you may just not generate the benefit off of it that you want to see. If your Apollo whiffs, it's too bad, so sad. If you're Zeus, you Zeus something down, you fail to swing over because of like a shield or a tsunami. It was just -1 for no reason.
Yeah,
Same
it costs
thing
you
with
a
the
lot.
meter.
Yeah.
It costs so much, and it puts you so far behind. And that is all outside of the fact that Laurels and Lavalith are absolute all-stars in this deck. I have Lavalith a Divine so many times, and every time it's just killer. Absolutely
You
killer.
never hit a set back row.
No,
back row. You
you never hit a set back row.
the number of times your opponent will have 3 set back row and a face-up Divine with 3 spirits, and you'll go, yeah, I'll burn you for 3 with this Lavalith. Pop the back row.
I've been
pop
saying
the,
this.
the Divine.
Tornado is a burn card, and Lavalith is just a better Tornado. It's just that simple. I've been saying this since set 1.
Give me a counter rune that costs 1. I don't care what element it is. A counter rune that costs 1 that says target a face down back row. Pop it. Give me Dust Tornado.
Lavalith is such a problem that legitimately I cannot see myself playing any deck that has a Divine in it because you just go minus every single time. Because the instant
It's
you
so
think your
crazy.
opponent might not have a Lavalith, it's already too late. Your Apollo has been shot.
Kayla, where's the gun?
The bow of Apollo ain't looking so great right now, huh? Regardless, I still love Elestrals, and I think that this upcoming set's going to be really fun. I think that likely it'll come down to, you know, local scenes that are where a lot of the real fun happens, the casual scene, like the online webcam casuals, because if the format plays out the way that we're expecting it to, it is very likely that you'll see these big premiere events just be a lot of people on the same deck, because just every other deck cannot handle anything that reads the number 5, especially not the number 6. I'm looking forward to locals because I know that I'll be able to convince people to not pull up with 5s. We'll be able to play cool stuff and be able to enjoy the meta outside of exactly 5s.
That just about does it for all of our thoughts on the current crab meta. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you enjoy the crabs? Do you enjoy 5
I
being
love crabs.
big number?
I have crabs.
And if you have any ideas to beat this strategy, I know we only have one more big tournament for Frostfall, but I'm curious to see if you have any ideas on how to conquer the crabs.
Yes,
and
leak
all
us the
big
goo. Leak the goo
guys.
to us. Tell us
Leak it
the
down.
sauce.
You should leak now.
As always, if you are going to pick up this deck and any other product in the future to get prepared for Daybreak, make sure to use our affiliate link down in the description below. It definitely helps out the channel a lot, gives us a little bit of kickback on orders, so we definitely appreciate all of your support. And with that, Peace out, my dumbugs.
We'll see you in the next video. I promise it won't come out in a month.
That's right. This Prague video is about to be done.
Peace out, my bugs.